Before you come with your pitchforks and accusations that I am back with yet another clickbait title, please hear me out. Sure, Araminta Cowper did some dubious things in the third season. Sure. She was one of the people who sort of instigated Portia to immediately clock Marina as a possible competition for her girls due to Marina's beauty. Sure. She took delight in writing the scandalous Whistledown issue that called to mind the authenticity of the Bridgerton children parentage, thus falsely implying that Violet Bridgerton might have cheated on her husband. And sure, she was utterly, completely obsessed with Cressida securing herself a match. Although, to be fair, this was the case for all the mamas of the ton, as marrying their children off to respectable partners was part of their duties as mothers, and they were the ones who were most concerned with those issues, especially when it concerned their daughters. So yeah, I'm not disputing that Araminta Cowper, which by the way, am I the only one still pissed that they named her Araminta? Knowing fully well that Sophie's stepmother is also Araminta. And now for the first time in the show, we have two people with the exact same first names. And as much as I know that this is a common occurrence, my brain just can't ignore it, especially because it keeps screaming that Araminta is not such a common name, that the likelihood of two women who are similar in age and within the same social circle having the exact same name is ideally very low. And yet, in the show, we see it reflected. It doesn't make any sense. But sorry, I digress. Back to the point I was making. I'm not disputing the fact that Araminta Cowper is not a good person. In fact, one could say she's been pretty horrid, pushing for and encouraging her daughter's jealous tendencies and negative traits. And we can all agree that she probably played no small role in the type of person that Cressida grew up to be. If Cressida is our Regina George in the show, then Araminta is most likely our June. Except she's way more capable and more mature than June George could ever hope to be, thank the gods. But the point still stands. Cressida turned out the way she did, partly because of her mother. And the conversation that Araminta has with Cressida in Cressida's boudoir, after Cressida's deception and false claim as Lady Whistledown was revealed, confirms this. That she was chiefly responsible for the ideology that her daughter navigated their world with, and how said ideology came back to bite her in the ass. And I'm sure that's what has you confused as well. Because how can I say that the ideology came back to bite Cressida in the ass and yet claim that Araminta could possibly be the smartest person on the show? Well, it's because even if the show tries to imply otherwise by painting her in a negative/villainous light, Araminta, like Portia, did give some practical advice that is pretty helpful in helping her daughter navigate their world. And the worst or best part, depending on what part of the divide you sit on, is that the show itself literally confirms this through its seasons and its characters' actions. When Cressida's Lady Whistledown scheme is foiled and she, whilst devastated, wonders why her mother wrote such horrible things about the Bridgertons, considering that Eloise was the only one with whom she had ever had a semblance of a true friendship, Araminta tells her daughter, in this world, it is every person for themselves, especially amongst women. And those words, as selfish as they might sound, as villainous as the show aims to have them be, within the scene that they are said and considering the actions that preceded them, those words for me still ring very true and are quite astute, given everything that happens within the show and the context and time frame within which the show was placed. Araminta's words to her daughter was to let her realize that the world was often unfair to women, and that as women, putting themselves and their interests first, being a bit selfish and self-serving, is the way for them to get what they want. And I do see merit in her words. Because yes, we are conditioned to look out for others, to be selfless, to be kind. Living like everything is meant to serve our own good and backstabbing anybody that might come in the way of us accomplishing our goals is something a lot of us frown at. It's not how we build good relationships and good friendships, and it's definitely not how we are socialized. Having empathy for others is a good trait, and I just feel the need to state that right now before anybody drops a comment thinking that I am advocating for Araminta's way of thinking, especially because I'm about to defend the hell out of it. Because you see, Bridgerton might want to paint that scene as particularly bad and Araminta has been villainous, but the thing about it is that the characters, all the way from season 1, prove Araminta right time and again. Within the world of Bridgerton, it really is every person for themselves and their own family. Acting otherwise speaks to a dishonesty in not examining these characters for who they are, flaws and all. And who they really are is selfish to varying degrees. And yes, this is inclusive of, and in fact, very much speaks to the Bridgerton family as well. Hell, even Eloise's friendship with Cressida is one that is all about what Eloise wants and really about how Cressida would also benefit from their friendship. It's why when things are crashing around Cressida with the dread of her parents planning to wed her off to a septuagenarian, Eloise is not really there to offer Cressida any support. Instead, she's all focused on how things aren't working out for her and how Penelope is about to marry her brother on the false pretenses, or rather, with her identity as Lady Whistledown not being divulged to Colin. Eloise doesn't really have the room or space to accommodate Cressida's own issues because she has more on her own mind and her own issues are more pressing to her. Selfishness really is the name of the game, and at the core of the Bridgerton story are characters who are all looking out for number one. It is Simon's desire to look out for himself, his interest, and his grudge against his father that made him make the vow that he would never marry and would never sire an heir in order to spite his father. A selfless person would have considered that the Duke of Hastings might have been his father, yes, but he's just one in the line of other Basset men and women who all lived and worked to get their family to the point that they were at before the Duke was conferred with the title. That title was meant to be generational, something that Simon's ancestors would never have dreamed of and would have been absolutely ecstatic about should they have gotten the chance to know that someone down in their line would be conferred with that prestigious hereditary title. And yet Simon, due to his anger, rightful anger might I add, because let's be honest, his father was absolute shit and a dick. But due to his anger, Simon was willing to take a direct action that should his grandparents or great-grandparents have been alive, they would have boxed his ears. Like, excuse me, boy, that is a dukedom, a fucking dukedom. Are you going to let it go? Just like that? Let me tell you, if Bridgerton was another type of show and there was a supernatural element to it, best believe he would have had great uncles and aunts screaming into his ears every time he tried to take a nap. Hell, if I was one of his relatives, best believe I would be screaming along too. Simon's refusal to propagate his line was and would be considered selfish in the time in which the story was told, and yet, because he's the main love interest and the other half of the season's story that was being told, his actions were not read the same way in which Araminta's self-serving words were, given the context. Instead, it was attributed to a traumatic response as a result of his father's actions, and the show expected us to understand. And I say this as someone who did understand and would have made the same exact vow as Simon did. But the difference is that I am well aware that I am, by all accounts, a selfish being who is trying to serve my own interest and looking out for me, myself, and I. So why is Araminta, and by extension Cressida, judged for their own actions by the story itself if it's not biased that they aren't the main characters of the show? And speaking of main characters, there's Daphne. Now, the entirety of season 1 can be summed up as these two characters being driven by their wants and desires and looking out for each other's interests, each other's own interests, which was what led to them agreeing to scheme to fake date so as to serve said individual interests. For Daphne, that is securing a match by getting the men of the ton who had been scared off by Anthony to come calling on her again, by wanting the woman that a duke desires. And for Simon, it was getting the matchmaking mamas of the ton off of his back now that it seemed like he had found someone he was actively courting. Of course, the thing about these two characters and their pursuits of their own interests was that feelings got in the way. In fact, one could say that Simon, being moved in a moment of passion to follow Daphne out into the garden that night and kiss her, when he was very much aware, like the rest of the turn were, that Prince Frederick was most likely going to propose to Daphne that very night. One could say that that wasn't just Simon being blinded by passion, but him displaying a moment of selfishness, where all that mattered was his own happiness and his own desires. Because let's take a couple of steps away from that scene. Imagine if this wasn't just us focusing on the romance. Simon, at that point of the story, had no idea that he would eventually fall hopelessly for Daphne and decide to have children with her. At this point of the story, he had zero idea that he would later on set himself free from the vow he had made at his father's bedside. At that point, he wasn't planning on marrying Daphne because he didn't want to leave her without any children. If he was being selfless, if he cared about her future, if he wasn't looking out for numero uno, he wouldn't have followed her into the garden, compromising her honor and forcing Anthony to do what was expected in Regency society, which was to challenge him to a duel. That was a moment of pure selfishness right there. Even Daphne's rape of Simon was because she wanted to serve her own needs in that moment. She wanted a child and didn't care about Simon's aversion to one or the reasons for it. Like, yes, he lied to her. I'm not disputing that he broke her trust and took advantage of her naivety. But it doesn't dispute the fact that in that scene and what followed afterwards, it was less about what Simon wanted and more about what she wanted, and was a clear case of her looking out for herself. Because in cases of infertility, society rarely ever looks at the man or holds him to blame. The weight of that often rests on the woman, and that is something else that Simon was willing to subject Daphne to serve his grudge against his father. That was what she was resisting. That was a way in which her, a woman, chose to look out for herself, and which the story supported and was okay with, even though it was, like I stated earlier, clearly sexual assault. Season 2 is also pretty clear-cut in how the leads pushed and served their own interests. We started season 2 with Anthony having decided to take on a wife with a clear list of traits and accomplishments he wanted his wife to have. He interviewed the young women like they were applying for a job and settled on Edwina because she clearly hit all of his requests with flying colors. The problem was that the one he wanted was Kate. And what then followed was a season that was filled with the most self-serving and selfish case of events as far as Anthony Bridgerton is concerned. He came really close to kissing Kate, got all hot and bothered and heavy with her, was caught by his sister in the same compromising position that Simon had been in the previous season. Sans the tongue down the throat and the hands on the boobs, and proceeds to instead propose to Edwina, being aware of what he had done. But because of his refusal to marry someone he might have a chance of loving for fear of creating his mother, should he die before his wife, he chose instead to be as unscrupulous as ever. Please note the hypocrisy. I'll go in depth into it in my Hypocrisy of the Bridgertons video later. But as I was saying, Anthony was all about what he wanted, and the show does imply that he seemed to want the best of both. He was drawn to Kate even as he saw Edwina as the safe option that would keep him from having to face his fears head on. And that is why he kept oscillating between both of them, even to the point of having the audacity to be upset when Kate informs him of her plan to go as far away from him to India, if need be, to ensure that her sister is happily married to the man she's falling in love with. And Anthony keeps being drawn to her and keeps having these moments with her, breaking Kate's heart and Edwina's trust time and again, because at that point, all he was thinking of was himself and what he wanted. If he had taken the moment to step away from himself and really considered what was best for both women, we wouldn't have gotten the push and pull that was our experience the entire season, and how infuriating that was. And yes, Kate is selfless. It takes a lot of putting others above yourself to be able to raise your baby sister and keep your family strong whilst your mother is grieving. I am not going to ignore that or cheapen that. The problem, however, was that Kate was mostly having half. She had moments of selflessness where she's willing to sacrifice her own happiness for the sake of her sister's prestigious match. But at the same time, she has moments of selfishness where she's actively engaging in flirtations with the same man in the study and breathing in his words and scent like she needs them both to live. Kate most likely convinced herself that she was looking out for Edwina, which was why she didn't say anything to her. However, I think truly being selfless with regards to her sister would have meant Kate deciding to put it all on the table for Edwina and letting her sister know about her attraction and desire for Anthony, and having Edwina come to her own conclusions and make her own decisions. Yes, it would have been messy. Yes, it would have hurt Edwina. But it would have hurt her way less than finding out the truth right at the altar. And Edwina would never have had a chance to accuse Kate of carrying on with her fiancé behind her back. Just saying. But coming out to tell Edwina might have been what Edwina needed to hear. However, it wasn't what Kate wanted to tell her. And in that situation, Kate chose herself, her silence, the comfort of not wanting to rock the boat and ruin the situation, which ultimately ruined the situation anyway. And of course, there's Penelope. Lady Whistledown has always been about Pen fulfilling her desire to observe the ton and speak on her observations in a way that gave her a voice that being in her family and existing on the fringes of their society had taken away from her. Her revealing the truth about Marina served her interest, keeping Marina from saddling Colin with a baby that wasn't his, and in a way helped create the situation where she and Colin could get together in season 3. Her keeping her earnings from her work as Lady Whistledown her secret amidst her family's financial struggles was still her looking out for herself. Given the money would have meant having to explain where she got the money, which might have let the Lady Whistledown secret out of the bag. And Pen wasn't willing to do that. And you know what? I totally understand the why of it. Hell, even Portia is driven by her focus to look out for her own interests. And in this case, said interests are her daughters and her desire to see them well taken care of. It's why she chooses to betray Jack and steal the money stolen to help herself and her daughters. Hell, we could even say that it was Colin's selfish desire to be a part of the in-group that had him making the "I will never court Penelope Featherington" joke in the midst of the Gentlemen of the Ton, which was what set off a lot of the happenings in the 3rd season, and that had him trying to make it up to her by teaching her to be herself and let her inner self shine, which in turn led to him realizing that he's falling in love with her and then chooses to be with her. I could go on and on about how practically every character in the show has looked out for themselves in one way or the other, even Lady Danbury. And how the show rarely ever considered that a negative then. And it wasn't until I had the thought of this video that I then found myself questioning why I'd read that scene with Araminta in such a negative light. Because if those words had come from, say, Lady Danbury, I'm sure I wouldn't have automatically dismissed it as Araminta giving her daughter bad advice. Because, unfortunately, she is right. In this world, it is often a case of every man for himself. And this is practically the case in the world of Bridgerton, especially for the women and the girls. But hey, that's just my thought. What about yours? Let me know in the comments. Like this video if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet. Share this video if you want to. Support me on Patreon if you can. And until tomorrow's video, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.